It began with a touch. Nothing dramatic, just a brush of his hand against mine as we reached for the same folder in the conference room. At that moment I felt a spark. A warmth I hadn't experienced in years. His name was Andrew. He was married and so was I. We both wore our wedding bands like armor. But that fleeting moment shattered something in me. It was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it at the time. Andrew and I worked together for years, but we were nothing more than colleagues. Polite greetings in the hallway, shared smiles during meetings, the occasional joke in the break room. But lately things had shifted. My marriage to Tom had become stagnant. The routine of it, the predictability, felt suffocating. We spoke in half sentences, communicated more through obligation than love. I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to confront it. Then Andrew started staying late at the office, and so did I. It felt innocent at first. We worked on the same project, and late nights meant shared deadlines and caffeine-fueled problem-solving. But somewhere in those quiet hours, as the office emptied and it was just the two of us under the glow of fluorescent lights, we began talking about more than work. He told me about his wife, Melissa, how they were high school sweethearts, how they had 2 daughters who lit up his world, but a marriage that had dimmed over time. He didn't bash her, he spoke about her with respect, even love. But there was a sadness in his voice that mirrored my own. I told him about Tom, about the long silences at the dinner table and the growing distance between us. We both ached for something more but didn't dare to say it aloud. The first kiss happened on a rainy night after a late meeting. We were the last ones in the parking lot, and I don't even remember how it started. One moment we were laughing about something inconsequential, and the next his lips were on mine, soft but insistent. It was like breathing for the first time after holding my breath for years. When he pulled away, we were both stunned into silence. "I'm sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Don't be," I whispered. That was all it took. From that night on, we were consumed by each other. We found excuses to see each other outside of work. A coffee here, a stolen hour at lunch there. Every moment felt electrifying and dangerous. He made me feel alive, wanted, like the version of myself I had lost somewhere along the way. I didn't think about the consequences. Or maybe I did, but I pushed them aside, convincing myself we weren't hurting anyone. Not really. But we were. And the weight of it grew heavier every day. Tom started noticing the changes. I wasn't home as much. When I was distracted, my phone always within reach. He'd ask questions, simple ones at first. "Where were you?" Or "Why are you smiling?" But soon they turned sharper, more accusing. I lied to him, of course. Said it was work stress or that I'd caught up with an old friend. I hated myself for it, but not enough to stop. Melissa noticed too. Andrew told me she had started staying up late, waiting for him to come home, her eyes searching his face for answers he refused to give. He said she asked if there was someone else and he denied it. I didn't ask how he felt about lying to her. I wasn't ready to hear the answer. Our affair escalated. We booked hotel rooms, claiming business trips or late-night deadlines. Those stolen hours became my escape, a sanctuary where the world outside ceased to exist. But every high came with a crushing low. The guilt would creep in during the quiet moments, when Tom kissed me goodbye in the morning, or when I saw a family photo of Andrew, Melissa, and their daughters on his phone. I told myself I couldn't keep doing this, that it had to end, but the pull between us was too strong. Everything unraveled one evening when Tom found a text I hadn't meant to send. It was simple, just "I miss you." But it was enough. He confronted me, his voice trembling with anger and hurt. "Who is he, Claire?" he demanded. I couldn't answer. The truth was written all over my face. I moved out that night. I didn't even fight for our marriage. Maybe I should have, but I couldn't live with the lies anymore. Andrew's world fell apart soon after. Melissa found out through a mutual friend who had seen us together at a restaurant across town. She didn't yell or cry, he told me. She just said, "I hope it was worth it," before packing her bags and taking the girls to her mother's house. For a brief moment I thought Andrew and I could finally be together. The barriers were gone. But the reality of our choices hit us like a freight train. The romance that had felt so intoxicating in secret now felt suffocating in the harsh light of day. Our lives were in ruins, 2 families destroyed, children left confused and heartbroken, and a love that now seemed more like an addiction than anything real. We tried to make it work. For months we clung to each other, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage. But the guilt was too much. Every touch reminded me of the people we'd hurt. Every kiss tasted like regret. In the end, we both knew we couldn't build a future on the ashes of what we'd burned. Now I live alone in a small apartment, surrounded by echoes of the life I once had. Tom has moved on, and I heard through mutual friends that Melissa has too. Andrew and I don't speak anymore. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about me, about what we lost. I think about him all the time, but not in the way I used to. The love we shared, if you can call it that, feels like a scar. Something that will always be with me. A painful reminder of the choices I made and the lives I destroyed. If I could go back, I'd do things differently. But life doesn't offer do-overs, only lessons learned too late. The silence in my apartment is deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator or the occasional sound of traffic outside. It's in this stillness that my mind often wanders back to everything that happened, replaying it like a movie I can't turn off. I try to piece together where it all went so wrong. Was it the moment Andrew and I gave in to temptation? Or did the cracks in my marriage to Tom appear long before that, making me vulnerable in ways I didn't understand? I've spent countless nights asking myself these questions, though the answers never come. Therapy helped for a while. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Avery, listened patiently as I spilled my darkest secrets, my guilt, and my lingering feelings for Andrew. She once told me, "You're chasing the idea of him, not the man himself." At the time, I didn't believe her. I thought Andrew was my soulmate, the one who truly understood me. But now, looking back, I see her point. The affair wasn't just about him. It was about escaping the emptiness I felt in my life. Tom and I had been married for 10 years. We met in college, during a time when life felt wide open and full of possibilities. He was steady, reliable, and kind, everything I thought I needed. For a long time we were happy. We built a life together, bought a house, and talked about starting a family. But somewhere along the way the passion faded. Or maybe it was never really there. I don't know anymore. What I do know is that I stopped looking at Tom the way a wife should look at her husband. And he stopped looking at me that way too. Andrew filled that void. He made me feel seen, desirable, alive. But he wasn't the answer. He was just a distraction from the real problem, me. My inability to face the cracks in my marriage, to communicate with Tom, to confront my own unhappiness. It all led me down a path I'll regret for the rest of my life. After Tom and I separated, I thought I'd feel free. But freedom is a double-edged sword. The weight of guilt didn't lift. It only grew heavier. I remember the day Tom came to pick up the last of his things. He stood in the doorway, holding a box of his belongings, and looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. Part anger, part sadness, but mostly disappointment. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Claire," he said before walking out. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the empty space where he'd been. It was the first time I truly felt the enormity of what I'd done. I had destroyed the trust of a man who had loved me, who had given me everything he could. And for what? For a fleeting connection with someone who was just as broken as I was? Andrew's life didn't fare much better. Melissa filed for divorce, and from what I've heard, it wasn't amicable. She fought for full custody of their daughters, citing his infidelity as evidence that he was an unfit father. He called me one night drunk and angry, railing against the unfairness of it all. "She's punishing me for something she had a hand in," he slurred. "Our marriage was already dead, Claire. You know that." I didn't know what to say. He was right in some ways, but that didn't absolve us of our choices. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, but the truth was I didn't believe it myself. That phone call was one of the last times we spoke. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life. I threw myself into work, hoping the long hours would distract me from the ache in my chest. I reconnected with old friends, though most of those relationships were strained. People didn't know the full story, but they knew enough to look at me differently. The whispers, the judgmental glances, it was like a scarlet letter I couldn't escape. One night, I ran into Melissa at a coffee shop. It was completely unexpected. She was standing in line ahead of me, her hair tied back in a loose bun, wearing the kind of casual confidence I used to envy. When she turned and saw me, her expression hardened. "Claire," she said, her voice cold but controlled. "Melissa." I managed, my heart pounding. For a moment we just stared at each other. I wanted to apologize, to explain, to say something, anything that might lessen the pain I'd caused. But what could I possibly say that would make a difference? "I don't need your apology," she said, as if reading my mind. "What I need is for you to stay away. From me, from Andrew, from my daughters. You've done enough damage." Her words stung, but I couldn't argue with them. I nodded and left without ordering my coffee. That encounter stayed with me for weeks, a constant reminder of the ripple effect of my actions. Sometimes I wonder what Andrew is doing now. I know he moved out of state after the divorce, closer to his parents. A mutual friend mentioned he's trying to rebuild his relationship with his daughters. I hope he succeeds. Despite everything, I don't wish him unhappiness. In a way, I think we both got what we deserved, but that doesn't mean I want him to suffer. As for me, I've learned to live with the consequences of my choices. I'm still figuring out who I am without the labels of wife or lover. Some days are easier than others. There are moments when I feel hopeful, like maybe I can start over and build a life I'm proud of. But there are also moments when the weight of regret feels unbearable. When I lie awake at night replaying every mistake, every hurtful word, every selfish decision. I don't know if I'll ever truly forgive myself. Maybe that's part of the punishment, living with the knowledge that I destroyed not just my own life, but the lives of people who trusted me. What I do know is that I can't change the past. All I can do is try to be better, to make choices that align with the person I want to be rather than the person I was. Sometimes when I'm walking through the park or sitting alone with a book, I catch glimpses of the life I might have had if I'd made different choices. A couple laughing together on a picnic blanket. A father pushing his daughter on a swing. It's bittersweet, these reminders of what I've lost. But they also remind me that life goes on, even after the worst of it. I'm not sure where my story ends or if it ever really does. But for now, I'm learning to live with the mess I've made, one day at a time. Time moves strangely when you're alone. Days blend together, weeks slip by unnoticed, and suddenly it's been a year since everything fell apart. A year of empty spaces, hollow apologies to myself, and an ache that's become a part of me. I still don't know if this is what healing feels like, or if I'm just surviving. Work has been my anchor, though even there shadows linger. The office is the same, but everything else has changed. People avoid looking me in the eye. Conversations die when I enter the room. It's not outright hostility. No one says anything to my face, but the unspoken judgment is worse. They know. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Gossip spreads quickly in a place like this, especially when two people suddenly disappear from the company holiday party circuit. Andrew resigned 6 months ago, and part of me was relieved. The other part? Devastated. Even after all that had happened, I wasn't ready to lose him completely. I never got to say goodbye, never got closure. He left quietly, slipping out of my life the same way he entered it, unexpectedly, leaving chaos in his wake. I still think about him more often than I'd like to admit. It's not love anymore, not really. It's more like unfinished business. Questions that will never have answers. Did he ever regret us? Or was he too busy picking up the pieces of his own life to think about what we'd shared? I tell myself it doesn't matter, but deep down I know it does. I tried dating a few months ago, encouraged by friends who thought it was time for me to get back out there. I wasn't ready, but I went anyway, thinking maybe it would help me move on. The first date was with a man named Mark. He was nice, charming even. A divorced father of 2 who understood what it meant to have a past. We met at a cozy Italian restaurant downtown, and for the first hour I almost felt normal. We talked about work, movies, travel. He made me laugh, and for a moment I thought maybe I could do this. Maybe I could start over. But then he asked about my divorce, and the air between us shifted. I gave him the sanitized version, the one I practiced in the mirror. "We grew apart," I said. "It happens." He nodded, accepting the answer without pressing further, but the weight of the lie sat heavy in my chest. By the time the check came, I knew there wouldn't be a second date. It wasn't Mark's fault. He was kind and patient, but he deserved someone who wasn't dragging a mountain of guilt into every conversation. After that, I stopped trying. I told my friends I needed more time, and they stopped pushing. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever be ready to let someone in again. Not because I'm afraid of being hurt, but because I'm afraid of hurting them. Tom remarried last month. I found out through Facebook, though I hadn't looked him up in over a year. His new wife is beautiful, Bright smile, kind eyes, the kind of woman who radiates warmth. They had a small ceremony in a garden somewhere, surrounded by family and friends. He looked happy, genuinely happy. Seeing him like that should have stung, but it didn't. Instead, I felt relieved. Relieved that he had found someone who could give him what I couldn't. Someone who wouldn't betray him the way I did. I don't know if he's forgiven me. I doubt he ever will, but at least he's moved on. Melissa, on the other hand, has kept her distance. I've avoided crossing paths with her again, though there have been close calls. Once I saw her at the grocery store with her daughters. They were in the cereal aisle, laughing about something, completely unaware of me watching from behind a display of soup cans. I wanted to say something, but what could I possibly offer her? Another apology? Another reminder of the pain I caused? Instead, I slipped out of the store, my heart pounding. That's how it always is now. Running from the ghosts of my choices, hoping to avoid the wreckage I left behind. It's not all bad, though. Slowly, I'm finding pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. I've started painting again, something I gave up years ago when life got too busy. At first, it was just a way to pass the time. A quiet activity to fill the long evenings. But now it's become something more. A way to process everything I've been through. To channel the pain and regret into something tangible. My paintings aren't particularly good, but they're honest. Swirls of color that capture the chaos in my mind, the moments of hope and despair. I've even thought about taking a class, maybe meeting other people who understand what it means to create from a place of brokenness. It's a small step, but it feels significant. For the first time in a long time, I'm doing something for me. Not for Tom, not for Andrew, not to escape or distract myself. Just for me. Life isn't what I thought it would be. I never imagined I'd end up here. Alone in a small apartment, rebuilding from the ground up. But maybe that's the point. Maybe life isn't about having everything figured out, but about learning to live with the uncertainty, the mistakes, and the messiness. I still carry the weight of what I've done, and I probably always will. But I'm learning to live with it, to let it shape me without defining me. I'm learning to forgive myself little by little, even if I don't feel like I deserve it. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. It's strange how time doesn't necessarily heal wounds but dulls their edges. The sharp sting of guilt and regret I felt a year ago has softened into a quiet ache, one that I've learned to carry like a part of me. It's not that I've forgotten what I did, or that I've stopped feeling the consequences of it, but I've stopped fighting against it. Some pain, I think, isn't meant to disappear. It's meant to remind us of who we were, who we don't want to be again. My days have settled into a routine. Work, painting, and occasional dinner with friends. I've started volunteering at a local shelter on weekends, something to give my life a sense of purpose. It's humbling work, listening to people who've lost so much and are trying to piece their lives back together. Sometimes I see reflections of myself in their stories. Mistakes that led them to places they never imagined. A longing for redemption. A desperate hope for a fresh start. One woman, Eleanor, comes to the shelter often. She's older, probably in her 70s, with a kind smile and a sharp wit. We struck up a conversation one afternoon while sorting donations, and she told me about her late husband. We had 50 years together, she said, her eyes twinkling with both joy and sorrow. And let me tell you, not all of them were good. But we loved each other enough to stick it out. Her words lingered with me long after that day. I thought about Tom and Andrew, about the choices I made that shattered everything. Maybe love isn't about grand gestures or fiery passion. Maybe it's about staying, even when it's hard. I wonder if I'll ever find a love like that again, or if I even deserve to. A few months ago, I got a call from Andrew. It was late, just past midnight, and seeing his name on my phone felt like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered, my heart pounding. "Claire," he said, his voice hesitant, almost fragile. I didn't know if I should call, but I needed to hear your voice. Hearing him again after so long was like opening an old wound. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "For everything. For dragging you into my mess. For not being stronger. For leaving without saying goodbye." His apology caught me off guard. I had spent so long blaming myself for what happened, I hadn't stopped to consider his regrets. But hearing them didn't bring the relief I thought it might. Instead, it reopened questions I thought I had buried. "I don't know what you want me to say, Andrew," I replied, my voice shaking. "I'm sorry to. But sorry doesn't fix what we did." "I know," he said quietly. I miss you." Those 3 words were like a dagger. I had missed him too. More than I wanted to admit, but I knew better than to say it aloud. We had already destroyed enough. "I can't do this," I told him. "Not again." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he said, "I understand. Take care of yourself, Claire." And just like that, he was gone again. I stared at my phone for a long time after the call ended, wondering if it was the last time I'd ever hear his voice. Part of me hoped it was. The other part, well, I've learned not to trust that part of myself. The seasons have changed since that call, and with them, so have I. I've started therapy again, this time not to process the affair but to figure out who I am outside of it. Dr. Avery has been patient, helping me untangle the threads of my choices and the patterns that led me to them. We've talked a lot about my need for validation, my fear of being alone, my tendency to run from problems instead of facing them head-on. "It's not about punishing yourself, Claire," she told me during one session. "It's about understanding yourself. You can't move forward if you're still holding on to the person you were." Her words resonated with me. I've spent so much time punishing myself for the affair, for the pain I caused, that I haven't allowed myself to grow from it. Maybe I'll never fully forgive myself, but I can try to be better. For me and for the people I might let into my life someday. I don't hear much about Andrew anymore. From what little I've gathered, he's focusing on his daughters and trying to rebuild his relationship with them. I hope he's finding peace, though I doubt it comes easily. I think we're both haunted by the same ghosts, even if we're no longer sharing the burden. Tom and I haven't spoken since our divorce was finalized, but I sent him a card when I heard about his marriage. Just a simple note wishing him happiness. He didn't reply, and I didn't expect him to. The gesture wasn't for him, it was for me, a small way of letting go. As for Melissa, I've kept my distance. She deserves her space, her healing, her new beginning without me as a reminder of the worst chapter in her life. I sometimes wonder if she's found someone new, someone who treats her with the respect and loyalty she deserves. I hope she has. My life isn't glamorous or exciting, but it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. I wake up each day with a sense of quiet purpose, even if it's just small things, helping at the shelter, painting a new canvas, reading a good book. The moments of sadness still come, but they're less frequent now, and I've learned to sit with them instead of running away. Sometimes I catch glimpses of a future I might want. A little house with a garden, a dog to keep me company, maybe even someone to share it with, though I'm not in a hurry to find them. For now, I'm content to focus on myself, to keep building a life that feels honest and true. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that love, real love, isn't about filling a void or escaping pain. It's about growth, acceptance, and facing life together, even when it's hard. I don't know if I'll ever find that kind of love, but I'm finally at peace with the possibility that I might not. And that's okay, because for the first time I'm learning to love myself. And maybe, just maybe, that's the first step toward everything else. Some nights I lie in bed and think about the woman I was before all of this began. She feels like a stranger to me now, naive, reckless, searching for something she didn't know how to name. I wonder if I could go back, if I'd warn her about what was coming. Would she listen? Or would she still be drawn to Andrew, to the spark that seemed to promise escape and passion in life? I've learned that the promises of forbidden love are lies, wrapped in the illusion of freedom. It's not freedom at all. It's a cage, one that tightens the more you try to hold on to it. I didn't understand that until it was too late, until I'd broken my life and watched Andrew's crumble alongside mine. Now I live with the pieces. Some days I try to rebuild. Other days I just sit among the ruins, accepting that this is where I am. Months pass and life becomes quieter. I still go to work, still volunteer at the shelter, still paint when I feel the need to empty my thoughts onto a canvas. I've joined a yoga class not because I'm particularly flexible or good at it, but because it forces me to slow down and be present. It's harder than I expected. My mind wants to wander, to pick at old wounds, but the instructor reminds us to focus on the breath, to let go of what we can't control. It's become my mantra. Let go. Letting go of Andrew has been the hardest. I don't love him anymore. Not in the way I did during the affair, but a part of me still clings to the memory of what we were. Or maybe what we thought we were. He represented something to me, a version of myself I wanted to be, bold, alive, untethered by the expectations of a loveless marriage. But that version of me wasn't real. She was just as trapped as the woman who stayed with Tom out of obligation. Letting go of him means letting go of that illusion. It means accepting that the happiness I was searching for doesn't come from someone else. It has to come from within. One afternoon while I'm cleaning out my closet, I come across an old photo album buried beneath a stack of clothes. It's from the early years of my marriage to Tom, back when we were young and hopeful and believed we could take on the world together. I sit on the floor and flip through the pages, feeling a pang of nostalgia for what we had, and what I destroyed. There's one photo that stops me. It's from our first anniversary, taken at a small bed and breakfast in the mountains. We're sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets, holding mugs of hot cocoa. Tom is looking at me with a smile that's so full of love it takes my breath away. I wonder if I ever looked at him like that. I wonder if I could have saved us if I tried harder, if I hadn't let myself drift away. Tears blur my vision, but I don't wipe them away. I let them fall, a quiet acknowledgement of the grief I've carried for so long. I close the album and put it back in the closet, not because I'm trying to forget, but because I'm not that person anymore. Those memories belong to a chapter of my life that's closed, and it's time to move forward. Forward, I've discovered, doesn't mean racing ahead. It means small, deliberate steps, like going out to dinner with a friend and allowing myself to laugh without guilt. Or spending a Saturday morning wandering through the farmer's market, savoring the simple pleasure of fresh flowers and the smell of baked bread. It means saying yes to things I would have avoided before, like signing up for an art fair to display my paintings. The fair is a turning point for me. Standing behind my small booth, watching strangers stop to admire my work, I feel a sense of pride I haven't felt in years. One woman buys a piece, a swirling mix of blues and grays that I painted during a particularly dark week. It's so raw, she tells me. It feels like it's telling a story. It is, I reply, though I don't elaborate. The painting doesn't need words. It's an echo of everything I've been through, everything I'm still learning to carry. That day, I meet other artists, people who have also poured their hearts into their work. One of them, a man named James, strikes up a conversation with me about technique and inspiration. He's warm, unpretentious, and genuinely interested in what I have to say. For the first time in a long time, I feel a spark. Not the reckless, dangerous kind I felt with Andrew, but something softer, quieter. Terrifies me. James and I become friends, meeting occasionally for coffee or to visit galleries. He doesn't push for more, and I'm grateful for his patience. I tell him about my paintings, about the shelter, about the life I'm trying to rebuild. I don't tell him about the affair. Not yet. It feels too soon, too fragile. But I know that if this friendship ever becomes something more, he'll need to know the truth. And maybe for the first time I'm ready to tell it. Not as a confession or a plea for forgiveness, but as a part of who I am. Because that's what I'm finally learning. I can't erase the past, but I don't have to let it define me. The affair, the pain, the mistakes, they're chapters in my story, but they're not the whole book. On a quiet evening, as I sit on my balcony watching the sun set over the city, I think about how far I've come. The loneliness is still there, but it's no longer overwhelming. The guilt still lingers, but it no longer consumes me. I'm learning to live with it, to let it coexist with the hope that's slowly growing in its place. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe James will become part of my life, or maybe he won't. Maybe I'll find love again, or maybe I'll spend the rest of my days on my own. Either way, I think I'll be okay. For the first time in years, I believe that I can build a life that feels whole, even if it's imperfect. And maybe that's what healing looks like. Not erasing the scars, but learning to wear them with grace. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. As the weeks turned into months, I started noticing subtle shifts in myself. I laughed more, smiled more, and let myself linger in moments of quiet joy instead of rushing through them. For so long I'd felt like a shadow of a person, weighed down by guilt and shame. But now, piece by piece, I was reclaiming who I was, or maybe discovering who I could be. James became a bigger part of my life than I anticipated. At first, our friendship revolved around art. Gallery visits, painting sessions in the park, long conversations about what inspired us. But over time, those conversations deepened. We started talking about our lives, our fears, the things we wanted but weren't sure how to reach for. He told me about his divorce, how he'd spent years trying to make a failing marriage work before realizing that love couldn't survive on effort alone. I didn't tell him about Andrew right away. I wanted to, but the words felt too heavy, too raw. What if he saw me differently? What if the fragile connection we were building shattered under the weight of my mistakes? But the longer I kept it from him, the more it felt like a secret I couldn't carry any longer. One rainy evening, as we sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, I decided to tell him. The words came slowly at first, stumbling over themselves as I tried to explain. I told him about Tom, about the affair, about the destruction it left in its wake. I didn't hold back, didn't try to sugarcoat or justify what I'd done. I just laid it all out, waiting for the inevitable look of disappointment or judgment. But it didn't come. Instead, James listened quietly, his expression thoughtful but not unkind. When I finished, there was a long silence between us, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the windows. "Thank you for telling me," he said finally. "That must have been hard." I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I understand if you don't want to." "Stop," he interrupted gently. "You made mistakes. We all have. What matters is what you've done since then. And from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've been trying to make things right." His words brought a lump to my throat, but I didn't let the tears fall. Instead, I just nodded, grateful in a way I couldn't put into words. After that conversation, something shifted between us. There was a new openness, a deeper understanding that made me feel lighter, freer. I didn't know where our relationship was headed, but for the first time I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't clinging to him as a lifeline or looking to him to fill the emptiness I'd carried for so long. Instead, I saw him for who he was: kind, steady, and patient. And for the first time, I felt like I had something to offer in return. The art fair where we met became a turning point in my life. Encouraged by the response to my work, I started submitting pieces to local galleries and exhibitions. To my surprise, a few of them were accepted. Seeing my paintings on display, surrounded by the work of other talented artists, felt like a dream. But more than that, it felt like validation, not of my talent necessarily, but of my ability to create something meaningful out of my pain. At one gallery opening, I overheard a woman discussing one of my pieces. It was a large canvas dominated by deep reds and blacks, with streaks of white cutting through like cracks in the surface. "It's so raw," she said to her friend, "like it's trying to break free from something." Her words stayed with me. Breaking free. That's what I'd been doing all along, wasn't it? Breaking free from the mistakes of my past, the version of myself that made them, and the weight of everything I couldn't change. James and I grew closer, and eventually, what began as a friendship blossomed into something more. It wasn't a whirlwind romance like what I'd experienced with Andrew. It was slower, quieter, and infinitely more real. There were no stolen moments or whispered secrets. Just two people learning to trust again, one step at a time. One evening, as we walked through the park, James reached for my hand. "You've come a long way, you know," he said. I smiled, looking down at our intertwined fingers. "I still have a long way to go." "We all do," he replied. "But the important thing is, you're moving forward." His words stayed with me. A reminder that healing isn't a destination but a journey. I wasn't trying to erase my past anymore. Instead, I was learning to live with it, to let it inform who I was without letting it define me. The years that followed weren't perfect, but they were mine. I continued to paint, to volunteer, to build a life that felt honest and whole. James became a part of that life, but he wasn't the center of it. I had learned the hard way that true happiness doesn't come from someone else. It comes from within. I kept in touch with Tom in small, sporadic ways. A polite email on his birthday, a brief conversation when we ran into each other at mutual friends' gatherings. He seemed happy, and I was genuinely glad for him. Our lives had diverged completely, but I no longer felt the sting of regret when I thought of him. Instead, I felt gratitude for the years we shared and the lessons they taught me. Andrew, on the other hand, remained a ghost in my life. Occasionally, I'd hear about him through mutual acquaintances, but I never reached out. Whatever we had, whatever we were, belonged to a past I had no desire to revisit. I hoped he was healing too in his own way, but I knew our paths were never meant to cross again. One day, as I stood in my studio, putting the finishing touches on a new painting, I realized something. I was happy. Not the fleeting, reckless happiness I'd chased during the affair, but a steady, quiet contentment. My life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was mine, and for the first time that felt like enough. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. I'm not the woman I was when this story began. I'm not defined by my mistakes, but I'm not running from them either. They're part of me, woven into the fabric of who I am. And though they brought pain and destruction, they also brought growth and understanding. If I could go back and undo everything, I would. But life doesn't work that way. All we can do is take the lessons we've learned and use them to build something better. And that's exactly what I'm doing, one day, one choice, one brushstroke at a time. As I sit here staring at a blank canvas in my studio, I'm struck by how different the silence feels now. It used to be oppressive, filled with the weight of my regrets and the deafening echoes of the past. But today it's peaceful. The quiet is no longer something to fear. It's something I welcome. A companion that lets me hear my own thoughts without judgment. This studio has become my sanctuary. A place where I can let my guard down and create without fear of failure. The walls are covered in paintings, some finished, others half-formed, waiting for inspiration to strike. Each one tells a story, not just about the person I was when I painted it, but about the person I'm becoming. There's one painting tucked in the corner that I can't seem to let go of. It's a swirl of dark reds and blacks, the colors almost angry, but there's a single streak of gold running through the center. I painted it in the weeks after Andrew's phone call, when I was trying to make sense of what we had been and what it had cost me. The gold was a last-minute addition, something I added late one night when I couldn't sleep. At the time, I didn't know why I put it there. But now, when I look at it, I see hope, small, fragile, but unyielding. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's light to be found if you're willing to search for it. James and I have settled into a rhythm that feels natural and unforced. We spend time together without expectations, sharing meals, visiting art galleries, or just sitting on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. It's not the kind of all-consuming love I once thought I wanted, but it's steady, grounded, and real. And that's exactly what I need. One evening, as we're sitting together on the couch, James turns to me with a thoughtful expression. "Have you ever thought about showing your work outside of the city?" he asks. I shake my head. I'm not sure it's good enough for that. He smiles, his eyes warm and reassuring. "You don't give yourself enough credit. Your work has something a lot of artists lack. It feels real. People connect with it because it's honest." His words touch something deep inside me, a part of myself that's still learning to accept praise without doubting its sincerity. Maybe, I say softly, the idea planting a small seed of possibility in my mind. Over the next few weeks, James helps me research galleries and art fairs in nearby cities. It's a slow process, filled with moments of doubt and second-guessing, but his encouragement keeps me moving forward. Eventually, I submit a portfolio to a regional art showcase, half convinced I won't hear back. But to my surprise, I'm accepted. The showcase is held in a quaint town a few hours away, in a large, airy venue filled with light and energy. Walking into the space on the first day, I feel a mix of excitement and nerves. My paintings are displayed alongside dozens of others, each one unique and compelling in its own way. For a moment, I feel small, like an imposter who doesn't belong here. But then I remember James's words, and I take a deep breath, letting the doubt melt away. The response to my work is more than I could have hoped for. People stop to admire the paintings, asking questions about the inspiration behind them.